Hello and welcome to the two-man power trip of wrestling. I'm your host, JP John Poz. With me today, very special guest, returning guest, the former owner of a Ring of Honor. He's a bit of a wrestling historian. He's a former ambassador for the wrestling business. He made his way down there in Puerto Rico. He is Mr. Cary Silkin. Cary, welcome back to the two-man power trip. How you doing?
JP, thank you for having me on. And I hate using these wrestling terms, but although this is going to be a forgotten piece of history. Um, Remember about a year, well, maybe a year and 3 months ago, the Ring of Honor Hall of Fame before the company was sold. And I was given so I'm a Ring of Honor Hall of Famer too.
Yes.
Whether whether they like it or not, it's all good.
Yes, that's true. Hall of Fame. You can't take that away from you. That is
No.
true. What is going on in your world, though? What have you been up to? I know you recently. I saw you about a month ago or so. But what have you been up to?
Um, within wrestling, very little, if it, or nothing. I'm still mildly involved in the ticket resale business. Just it's almost like a hobby, and I got to find a new hobby because the business isn't good right now. But I'm currently enjoying the good summer. Well, it's not that nice today, but I'm enjoying the good weather, and I don't want to say I'm retired, but I'm sort of in that realm. I still like to go to a I pay attention to wrestling, and I like going to some shows if they're local to me, where the people that are running them are my friends. You live in Jersey, right?
Yep.
So out by me in Lehigh Valley, there's a couple small promotions that run in the Poconos, and there's always, and then I don't know how much he's going to be involved anymore, but Kevin Kelly was doing this thing out at the old Hamburg Fieldhouse, very historic. You've probably been there at some point, I'm sure. Have
Yep.
you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, and I like going to some of these shows. There's always some wrestlers or staff or somebody who I'm friends with, and it's like, oh, there's good old Cary, right? That's
Yep.
that's what it's boiled down to. And I'm gonna make an appearance. Go visit. Let's put it that way. When the Ring of Honor show is in Trenton, the upcoming, I don't even, what is it? What is it called? Death Before Dishonor? Is it that?
Yes. Yes. Great
Yeah.
name. Yep.
So they'll have a good show, and so many of the guys that I'm glad they're. I'll say it. I'll say it publicly here. We said we weren't going to talk a lot about Ring of Honor, but we are. So I'm just happy that there's a lot of guys being used that were part of in the end of the Sinclair regime. Um, as you know from being around the wrestling business, it's wrestlers are they're very nervous, paranoid. They want, rightly so. They want jobs.
Yep.
So I'm glad Tony Khan bought the company. He's keeping the name going. I enjoyed the run with Sinclair because whatever, I was more active, and the pandemic messed everything up, as we know, essentially. But what I was going to say was, I'm glad these guys Matt Taven, Mike Bennett, Dalton Castle, Vinny, good old Prince Nana. There's a laundry list of names that I'm just. Mark Briscoe, of course, Jay Lethal. I'm glad they have a place to work. And I don't understand why they wouldn't have Jay Lethal as part of Ring of Honor, but it makes no sense to me.
Yeah, that's kind of weird. He's kind of like the MVP of ROH, if you will, like one of the all-time greats. Started in like 03, you know what I mean? He's been there since almost the beginning, and obviously world champ, pure champ. I mean, he's done it all for ROH.
Yeah, but regardless, I'm happy that these guys are getting work, and I'll go visit them in Trenton. Maybe I'll see you there.
Yeah, I was planning on it. I think it's the 23rd, right? Isn't it a Friday, I think?
It's a Friday.
I love that venue. There's like no bad seat in the house. I like that venue.
I think I don't know. I don't have a calendar in front of me. What is it? The 19th? Something like that. Take a look.
Let me check real quick as I look through the calendar. I think it is actually the 21st, I think.
Okay. It's on a Friday night.
Yep, Friday night, July 21st.
Well, for you and I, it's not a long ride, and it should be interesting. So, and I'm just happy. It's nice the Ring of Honor name stays alive. It's really unbelievable that it is.
It is kind of surprising, just like the way the business is, and obviously AEW is at the forefront. But it's just funny that somehow Ring of Honor stays alive all these years, 20+ years later, still going. To me, it's not the same, though. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. It's not the same. It's different.
It's not. I don't want to be negative, and I don't want to be back in my day. But you were there. In the Cary Silkin Ring of Honor era, which seems like a lifetime ago, there was a, let's go team kind of, we're all in this together. And that included the fans. And even with corporate Sinclair, it had that vibe to it. Does it still have that vibe? Maybe. I haven't been around it enough. But look, nothing stays the same forever. Don't we know that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But as we said, at least it's alive and just doing okay.
And keeps all those guys that you said before, like it gives them a job. Who knows if NXT or WWE or somebody else will pick them up, but it's awesome that Tony, gives them work and puts them on ROH, and they're still doing Honor Club and they're still doing pay-per-view. So it's great to see that, another part of the wrestling business is still alive.
Here's a funny thing. By the way, to your listeners, and you do a really good job. I follow you. I don't know how you put out all this content, but so to the listeners, we're pulling back the curtain. I said to John, I said to good old JP, I really don't want to talk about Ring of Honor, but here we are. What the hell was I going to? What the hell was I going to say? What did you just say prior to that?
Oh, it keeps that part of the business alive. It keeps all those guys working. Gives them a job.
Right. And there's not enough. There's so many guys, in AEW. I mean, under the AEW ROH banner, there's so many guys, and I guess we could say the same about WWE/NXT.
Oof, insane. Yep.
There's an insane amount of people. So there's a lot of competition. And so once again, I was going to pull the curtain back. Maybe I'll remember later what What?
Yeah, hopefully, yeah.
So, but yeah, it's what the hell was I gonna say?
You were
Anyway,
peeling back the onion. You were peeling back the curtain. You were doing something there.
I
Yeah.
got to peel my brain back. I'm getting too
Yes.
old here.
Yes.
But let's peel back. You had mentioned earlier, I what got me involved, quote unquote, in the wrestling business, and unless you've listened, not you, but people have listened to the podcast that I had done with Ian Riccaboni, which is still available. Last Stop Penn Station, which not only covers my Ring of Honor, my time in pro wrestling, but I had an interesting life, hustling tickets on the streets of New York in the 80s. It didn't live the healthiest lifestyle, but it makes for some really amazing stories.
Right.
But and what got me first time really inside the business was this bizarre idea. Well, it really wasn't that bizarre, but I had this idea back in like 1999. Myself and my friends, we used to go to Puerto Rico, to San Juan. It was just like our spot. We would go there, I don't know, 2 or 3 times in the winter. And I don't know if you've ever been to Puerto Rico, but if you stay where the airport is, the two tourists there's many places to go, but Condado Beach and Isla Verde are like 10 minutes from the airport. In other words, you land and you're at the Marriott right on the beach. It's
Is that
really,
close to the Senior Frogs over there?
yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, yeah, the Senior Frogs, I think that's in Old San Juan.
Yes. Yes.
You've been there.
Yep. Yep.
Anyway, so we were going down to Puerto Rico, and my cousin Mike G, who long time and even to this day, music writer. He was in. You're too young. Do you remember the East Coast Rocker or the Aquarian? It was a newspaper. It was a music newspaper.
No.
It was around for years. And so we're talking pre-internet, boys and girls. And Mike G was music editor. And it was sort of like it was sort of like a Village Voice,
Okay.
but not as controversial. But the great thing about the East Coast Rocker / Aquarian was if you were a music fan, and there was a tremendous, I'll tell you, there was a tremendous club scene in New Jersey in the 70s, 80s. Why? Because it's interesting. The drinking age was 18. Imagine that. Like I see 18-year-old kids now. I mean, I didn't know my ass from my elbow, but I was happy for that. And the drinking age was 18, and there wasn't this overboard. I'm not advocating drunken driving, but there wasn't. We would get in our cars, whatever. We were wild. So was everybody. Thus, there was a ton of clubs. Where do you live in Jersey?
Asbury Park.
Oh, well, perfect.
Yep.
So Asbury Park, going back to the, people think of Bruce Springsteen.
Yes.
But in the 70s into the early 80s, there was a ton of clubs just in Asbury Park. There, of course, the Stone Pony, this place called Julio's, the Fast Lane, DJs, and I'm leaving out a bunch. That's just Asbury. the whole Route 35, up and down Route 35, especially heading south to the shore, Point Pleasant, Seaside Heights, there was a huge rock and roll scene. And this not only was in the shore, it stretched throughout Jersey, Long Island, and it was basically copy bands. So at the same time that, the punk movement and into the new wave and CBGBs, in New York City, there was this tremendous rock and roll, predominantly copy band scene. Anyway, Mike Mike worked for the Aquarian, and he moved on in the dying days of the magazine business. Don't worry, folks. We're going to talk about wrestling.
We'll get there.
But this is interesting stuff. At least I.
Yep.
So Mike got a job with Sterling McFadden. Boys and girls, before the internet, print was important. And that's how you got your information. And John's a young man, but he's not that young enough to remember it. You wanted to grab the newspaper. You wanted to, just to find things out. You couldn't do it at a click. Anyway, Mike was in the magazine business. There was a company called Sterling McFadden that had I don't know, in their heyday, 50, 60 titles. These magazines like Teen Beat, Tiger Beat, and Metal Maniacs, and Country Western this. And they also had Wrestling World. So Mike was a longtime wrestling fan. And he was the first one, to turn me on to wrestling. He was the first one really to turn me on to rock and roll. And anyway, he was Sterling McFadden was hanging on for dear life in 1999, but they were still active. So we go to Puerto Rico a few times, and Mike, what happened was Mike wound up being the editor of Wrestling World magazine. They were down to 6 issues a year. And the guy who was doing it, he moved on, and Mike's like, I sure, I'll do it. And so we were going to Puerto Rico. And I said to my cousin, I go, they got this really cool wrestling scene. I was more knowledgeable than he was. I'd been getting the Observer forever, and I was always interested in the territories. I was one of those nerds that my interest stayed in wrestling for quite a while. We all have had, the feeling, John, when you can't get anyone to go with you to wrestling.
Yes. Yep, big time. Yes.
So I said to Mike in one of our trips down there, and he was aware that they had wrestling there, but I was more tuned in. I go, they got this really cool. Hey, you know what would be really cool, Mike? He's like, what's that? He goes, what if we published a magazine? And he's looking at me like I'm crazy. What if we published a magazine that was in Spanish and distributed in Puerto Rico? I bet you it would sell really good. Now, this is 1999. The internet, even though the internet was still in its infancy there it was, 10 years behind.
Yep.
And so Mike says, well, that's a great idea, except you're talking about distribution, you're talking about translation, you're talking about layout, art, I said to him, well, does Sterling McFadden, the publishing company that you work for, do they publish in Puerto Rico? Are they distributed in Puerto Rico? And he's like, yeah. So right across from the hotel we used to like to stay at, there was a a Walgreens kind of drugstore that had all the magazines, and there they were, just all the American and Latin magazines. Point being is, yes, they distributed there. So I said to my cousin, I said, look, if we could get the cooperation of the two companies, which was the IWA, which was Victor Quinones. I'm sure you know that name.
Oh, yes. Yep.
And the old guard, what was it? WWC? What was it?
With Carlos, yep.
Carlos Colon and the talk about a character, Victor Jovica. If we could get the cooperation from them, and obviously he goes, yeah, but it's got to be distributed. I go, well, so anyway, he made a couple phone calls, and within a day or two, we were having dinner with the guy that distributes the magazines, like their representative in Puerto Rico. And he told us, yeah, if you publish it, I will put them out. There was a certain criteria of issues or number of issues and where they're going to put them. But because it's no risk to them, they just put it out, and if it sells. So my idea was, well, if it's on the newsstands and we can get the two companies to sell the magazine at their wrestling shows, we have a half-assed chance that this might become something decent, because business down there was good. WWC had been around forever. That's the Carlos Colon and the who, Jose Gonzalez, the Invader, and it was the old guard. And meanwhile, Victor Quinones' IWA. Now, Victor Quinones, and John knows this, he's a really interesting character. He's possibly Gorilla Monsoon's son, that's been said.
Yep.
But I'm friends with Bushwhacker Luke Williams. He says that's not right. But be that as it may, Victor was in. What was the company in Japan he ran, John?
IWA Japan.
Right. So Quinones, this guy, Victor Quinones, it gets confusing because we're going to talk about Jovica in a second. It gets confusing with the two Victors, but Victor Quinones, he was, as a kid, involved. Some people say he came from a wealthy family. Some people say he didn't, excuse me. Somehow Gorilla Monsoon became like his god, either his father or his god's father. No one knows, but he was close with Gorilla Monsoon. And Victor, as a young man, was around the the old. There was only one company in the 80s. So Victor Quinones was around that. And eventually, after the Bruiser Brody death, which really fractured things, to say the least, in Puerto Rico, point is that Quinones, it's amazing. The guy spoke, he learned Japanese, and he spoke fluent Spanish, English, and Japanese. And through his connections over the years, he would work as a referee. He would be in the office. He opened up, what was it called again? John, in Japan.
FMW you're talking about?
Right.
Okay.
Right. Which was a blood and guts promotion. I think that's the one with Terry Funk and Mick Foley doing the barbed wire exploding bomb match. Am I correct?
Yep. Well, there was also IWA Japan, which Quinones had, which was also doing a lot of that crazy shit. Yeah.
Right. So what I'm trying to get to with a long story is he ran these companies in Japan, and when that folded, he came back to Puerto Rico. So there we are in '99. He's got this new company, IWA. It had been running for a couple years, and they were gaining traction. And this is at the same time as, you know, the WWC, WWE, Monday Night Wars were going on. Victor was smart. You know, his company was a lot flash, even though it was very slow compared to what we knew, a lot flashier, a lot more modern. The other company, the World Wrestling Council, I mean, you want to talk about old time slow matches, but that's what the people knew. So if we could get the cooperation of these two,
it was Wing, not FMW is Onita. It was Wing and then IWA Japan
okay,
for Victor.
thank you.
That's what I was thinking of. Okay, yes, yep.
So that was the plan. So we meet with the magazine distributor. He says, cool. My cousin's still telling me this is crazy. You know, I said, you've been in the magazine business a long time. I said, do you know layout people? He goes, yeah. Translator, yeah. Artwork, blah, blah, blah. I said, I could be a photographer at some matches if we get cooperation. So we went to Victor Quinones of the IWA. And at the time, Dutch Mantell was booking for them. And they were very nice to us. And it took a few trips, but they agreed that they will give us access and they will sell the magazines at the shows. It was a great deal for them, Poz. We give them the magazines at no cost. They sell them for $4 with whatever it was, $4, let's say. They keep 2 and give us 2. That's
right.
it.
You can't lose. Yeah. Yep.
Right. And so the idea of the magazine, and it was going to be, and Dutch asked us about this. He goes, now you're not right. He goes, Cary, you're not doing one of these Dave Meltzer kind of things, are you? I'm like, no, this is going to be like the old school, aftermag style.
Yeah, Bell After style.
Right, right. So now we go to Victor, the other company. So we got the one company, and they knew Victor Quinones, IWA, Dutch, they knew it's a wrestling magazine. We're going to cover both companies. There's no favoritism. So we get a meeting with Carlos Colon and Victor Jovica. And we went over to see these guys. And you want to talk, JP, you want to talk about good cop, bad cop. Colon was the good cop. So we sit down, we go in their office, and Victor Jovica, who's still alive and still running shows, he was, I believe, somehow of Austrian descent, married into a Latina. Somehow it was like half Austrian, half Latin. So he was a former wrestler, and he spoke Spanish, English, and Austrian. But when he spoke English, JP, he sounded like Dracula. So we have this meeting, and Jovica he goes, listen, you guys come down here. You think you're a big deal. He goes, I'll work with you, but you cannot, I will not, he didn't want to be, he wanted us not to cover the other company.
Right.
And my cousin is like, but Mr. Jovica, it's a wrestling magazine. He goes, the other company is shit. He goes, I'm not, lower, whatever the hell he says, lowering my standards. Point being, they didn't want to cooperate with us. So what did we do? We put out the first issue anyway. We had the IWA live interviews, stories, and we did some kayfabe stories, all complimentary on the other company. And the first issue came out. And here's an interesting thing, although it's outdated, but it's still interesting. You'll find it interesting. At the time, and we're talking about the prime time of magazines, if you had if magazines, Time Magazine, Rolling Stone, Sports Illustrated, were on the newsstand, if they sold 30%, that was considered good because there were subscriptions and there was advertising. So I said 30%. So the first issue came out, and I think between what we gave to the IWA and what was on the newsstands, I think it was like 5,000 total issues. Make a long story longer, it sold like an astounding 49% from the newsstands.
Nice.
People were buying it. And it was, if you're a wrestling fan in Puerto Rico, once again, most people didn't have internet. They'd never seen a wrestling, it was called the Lucha. I should have had one here to show you. I'll get you one. Lucha Libre de Puerto Rico. So it came out, and it was a success. So even without the cooperation of these other guys. And so what happened? Somehow the wrestlers who were wrestling for Carlos's company, they were like, hey, we want to be in this too. So did you ever hear, you've heard, the name Ricky Santana?
Yes. Yep.
Right. Ricky Santana was booking for them, and through someone got our phone number, and he called us up, and he wanted us to, he's like, how come you're not coming to our shows? I'm like, they told us they don't want to deal with us. He goes, I'll talk to Javica. Don't worry about it. I'm like, and you know what I'm thinking, JP? I'm thinking they allegedly did away with Bruiser Brody. Hey,
right. Yeah. Yep.
What do they care about?
Yeah, the magazine. What do they care about that for? Yeah.
What are they? If they're going to kill him, what value is mine? So we went to a show or two of the other company, and Jovica wasn't there. This is at the time when the young Colon brothers hadn't made it. They were kids. I mean, on their way to WWE soon, and they would bring the other company. They would bring in Abdullah the Butcher. They'd bring in this one and that one. Meanwhile, the IWA, our friends, their cards were doing really well. And this was like really the last of the territories, JP, because they would both run Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays every week. And so a lot of guys would come down there. There was a period of time where WWE was using them like they would use OVW, where they would, so IWA still had connections with WWE, and they would send guys down. Guys either they're trying to elevate, or guys that were on the down.
Right.
There's some names. Some of these names never made it. He's a good friend of mine. Not Andrew Anderson, Andy Anderson. He wound up. He still wrestles a little. He's out of the business. He never made it. You know the name Flash Flanagan.
Oh yeah, just interviewed him not that long ago. Yeah.
Right. Yep. Yeah, Flash was down there, and they bring in Balls Mahoney for a little while. And oh yeah, my good friend, I still in touch with him. I'm still in touch with Flash now and then. Abyss, Chris, he was down there, and Dutch was booking, and then they brought in Bushwhacker Luke. That's how busy. Once again, this is the IWA, not the bad guys that really didn't want to help us. So we get access to a few of these WWC shows. But here's the thing. The IWA, although they really didn't try as hard as they should have, were selling the magazines at the show. Sort of. But they weren't, let's put it this way, they weren't pushing it. But they gave us full access. The WWC, they weren't, selling anything, and we were getting minimal access. So we were, much better off with the IWA promotion, but we were trying to get both. If we could get both, so issue number 2 comes out, and my cousin says to me, "Holy shit. I've been in the magazine business for many years. This issue sold like 61% from the new."
Wow.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
It's not, it was on a run of like 5,000, but it was still an impressive number. And like the magazine distributor guy that we met with originally, this is over the phone, this. It completely sold out in the Dominican Republic. They might have sent a couple hundred over there. So all we need now, is to get WWC / Carlos Colon / Victor Jovica to fully cooperate with us and sell the magazines. And this might be, it wasn't going to be a multi-million-dollar thing, but it might be a viable thing. Our intention was, and we also needed sponsors. That would have been, that was difficult too, but that's another story. Anyway, so there was a weekend, on a particular weekend, Ricky Santana says, "Oh, I want you to come." We got Abdullah the Butcher coming in, and who the hell else did they have? I forget. Someone like Gangrel or something. And they're going to be there's a big Saturday night show in the town of Humacao, which is a small town, but it would be like running in like Eatontown, New Jersey, right?
Right. Yeah.
You get the picture. So it wasn't a long ride from San Juan. It was like an hour. And so we go up, me and my cousin go, and we're like, look, I think we had been to 2 shows previously with no problems, but once again, they're not selling the magazine. So we're like, all right, well, we'll come there, but it would be, he goes, oh, Ricky Santana says, excuse me, I spoke to Jovica and they're going to work with you with as far as like, all right. So we go to Humacao and it's this normal type of gymnasium. It was back off the road. I remember you had to take like a little dirt road, not real long, maybe 100 yards to get to the building. And we get there early and we parked in the back. And my cousin would do these interviews, which eventually got translated. Hope I'm not boring you here with all that.
No, not at all. Nope.
So, and I was the photographer, and it was fun being the photographer because if you look at the old Puerto Rico tapes, they don't have ringside. They were very paranoid about having ringside seating. So when they would do a show,
the fans are nuts.
The fans are nuts. So they would, if it was like, just picture a high school gym or a big gym, the first row were the bleachers. That's it. No one on the floor. And there are some cases, if you see some of these old stadium shows, where they did have a few floor seats, but the rule of thumb, because the fans were nuts, that's to say the least. And it wasn't like the 80s, but they still had it in the back of their minds, keep these people back. So me, as a photographer, I was able just to go up to the ring, and it was fun. It was really cool. So we drive to Humacao. Everything's groovy. There's Abdullah the Butcher. There's Gangrel. I think Jimmy Hart was there too. And everyone's nice to us. And the young Colon brothers and Ricky Santana and this one and that one. And we're like, all right, this is good. So the show starts, and in Puerto Rico time for wrestling, if it says 8 o'clock on the ticket, that means it starts at 9:30. And no one complains. The show, all right, maybe it'll start like 35, 40 minutes late. And then there'll be an intermission. I swear to God, both of the companies, the intermissions were over an hour. And you want to know why? I'll tell you. Because they controlled the concession stands.
Oh.
So and the people used to like to drink and party, and they would sell rum and cokes, beers. There was no regulation, let's put it that way. And both the wrestling companies, so they would have these long intermissions. Anyway, the show starts in Humacao, and the matches are going. And now, the only time we ever spoke to Victor Jovica was the Dracula, was when he told us in his office he wants nothing to do with us, right?
Yep.
So 2 issues have come out. We never have spoken to him. And Santana was the one saying, yeah. So it's in approximately the third match. And I remember Ricky Santana was in the ring. It was a tag team match. And I look, no, I don't look. I get a tap on my shoulder. And it's one of their security guards. And I knew a little Spanish, very little. And I think the word was like fuera, which essentially is like, you got to get the fuck out of here. You got to go. You got to go. And as he taps me and I'm hearing this, I look up and there's my cousin and there's Victor Jovica. And I'm like 100 feet away, and my cousin's got the magazine out, and Jovica is like, I see that, and I run over, And Jovic is like, I told you, fucking guy, I told you, we want nothing to do with you. And my cousin's going, Mr. Jovica, look, we're giving equal coverage here to the magazine, to your company. There's nothing negative. Da, 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 da. He's like, is this language permissible?
Yeah, absolutely.
He's like, fuck you two. He goes, you two. He goes, you two New York Jews. You come down. He says, I swear, you come down to my island and you defy me. Get the fuck out of here. And I'm like, okay. So once again, remember I mentioned the building was off the beaten track. It wasn't in the woods, but it was, and we parked in the back. So I said to Jovica, I go, all right, we're out of here. I go, sorry, maybe we could talk again. And I start walking towards the dressing room area because I knew that's where the cars were, right? He goes, you don't go out that. You don't go in my dressing room. He goes, you go out the front. He goes, get the fuck out of here. I'm like, holy shit. So when we walked out, it had gone from, don't forget, we got there around 5 o'clock, and this is in the wintertime. It was like, maybe 9 o'clock by now. It's dark. They didn't have, there's no one outside. The people are in the building, and there we are. We walk out the front door, and I'm like, now we have to walk around like a full circle to get to our car. And I'm saying to myself, oh my God, they did away with Bruiser Brody.
Right, yes.
Here we go. So we walk around the back, and there's the car. No, nobody jumped us. No one attacked us. No one beat us up. No one threatened us. But the car was sort of blocked in. It looked like, so it was like it was a rental car, of course. I had to make a move like one of those Smokey and the Bandit movies because I just wanted to get the hell out of there alive.
Dodge, yeah.
And so we I don't know. We had to just like go up a hill, whatever. We didn't crash in any cars, but we got out of there. And this is still in the day of the cell phone. Well, Ricky Santana, he saw all this because he was in the ring, and he's calling us up it's like 20 minutes later, and he's profusely apologizing. And we're like, dude, what do you get? She scared the shit out of us. So anyway, we never wound up working with that company, and we continued working with IWA. What was supposed to be in its planning phases, maybe 4 issues a year, or if we were really trying to be aggressive, or thinking if we could get some advertising, which we tried to, maybe bi-monthly, 6 issues a year, because it was selling. But as it turned out, JP, we only did 4 issues because eventually the IWA, Victor Quinones, they just didn't try to. It was selling great on the newsstands. It wasn't like we were going to get rich. This is sort of like a hobby.
Yep.
But they didn't want to sell it aggressively. They wanted to sell their but the thing I never understood, and I've talked to Luke Williams, Savio Vega was there, Miguel, the guys from, I failed to mention that the IWA, besides the Americans, they would bring in the Flashes, the Andy Andersons, the other ones I mentioned, and they would bring in legends too. They had a good core of the Puerto Rican talent. Savio Vega, Miguel Perez. What was the group? The Latin American group, the
Boricuas. Yep.
Right. Right. Hurricane Castillo. These were the hell is his name? There was another. Well, there's another. Ricky Banderas was a rookie. What did he wrestle under? He went to Mexico.
El Macias was a big one for him.
He did very well, and they had a really good crew, and they're wrestling with Dutch and Luke and Savio. They really knew how to book for that style. And, Dutch I learned a lot when I was there. And I Luke, in the end, why didn't they want to work with us? One night, Luke took us out and sort of told us the facts of life. And I don't want to be disrespectful because I see Savio now and then, and he's cool. But the long and short of it was that if you're not part of the culture, if you're an outsider, there was just an inherent lack of trust or wanting to help. And now, I am not making a blanket statement for the entire Latino population, but within this wrestling world, it was such a closed environment, and it was such a. And I remember saying to Luke, I go, but you've known Victor forever. He's like, mate, you don't get it. I go, but money's money, like $2, whatever. But what an interesting experience it was. It put me in the wrestling business, so to speak. I'll tell you, when the shows they would have, these ones, I remember going to the baseball stadium in Carolina, or the Roberto Clemente one, and it wasn't their heyday of the 80s. You see these old tapes with like 15,000, but they would draw like 6,000-7,000 people on these big shows, and they would run these. Look, the people that watch modern AEW wrestling, particularly, would think this is boring shit. You wouldn't. And if someone likes, like with the Bloodline, the way that's going, right?
Yep.
It was very similar. That's the closest thing of modern day, because in Puerto Rico, and Dutch explained this to me. He goes, Cary, I'm like a softball pitcher. I throw it. We throw the angles on the high arc. Let's not rush it.
Yes.
And they would have these very, very well timed out, slowly but sure angles where baby faces and heels would switch, that were done in such a way. You know how, since we've been watching wrestling, like until the last few years, it's been a little better. But like the championship belts meant nothing.
Yes.
They would just switch them and switch them and switch them and switch them and switch them. And Puerto Rico, they didn't do it there like that. It was the last. It was the last of the territories. So the magazine lasted 4 issues. It's a shame, but it was a lot of fun, and I got to meet a lot of people. And so the listeners know Victor Quinones of the IWA, who was, at least he gave us access. He might not have helped as much as he could. He passed away in 2005, and Luke stayed down there booking with Savio, and that was sort of the decline of it. And somehow, Savio still runs down there, and Carlos Colon and Victor Jovica still run. I don't know how, and I don't know what the business is like, but it's just an interesting thing, and I hope your listeners enjoyed that story.
Good stuff. Yeah, for sure. So how do you go from Puerto Rico doing that, kind of, being a fan, but in the business, so to speak, too, because you're doing the magazine? How do you do that, controversy aside, obviously, and get into ROH?
Well, I was an ECW fan, and I would go to ECW, where I met some of the founding members of Ring of Honor.
Right. They work there.
Right. So I got to know those guys, and when ECW went out of business, I knew that there was definitely a void in the rest, and Gabe had worked under Paul Heyman, and the other guy had his tape business, and I knew that they were going to open up a company. I was full-time, as a ticket broker, which I had been during the Puerto Rico era too, because the ticket broker, my ticket agency funded everything. So point is when I figured these guys are going to start a little wrestling company, I wouldn't mind being involved, silent partner kind of thing. And I approached them, and they didn't need me until they needed some money.
Yep.
I got in. We know what happened, and I had no intentions, JP, of wanting to own a wrestling company, and for lack of a better way to put it, having to be the sole owner. So that's and if it wasn't for a lot of strange things happening, I wouldn't have been the sole owner. And once I was the sole owner, thank God the ticket business was very good in that period of time. The internet hadn't taken over completely. The ticket prices did not go hog wild like they are now.
Yep.
And there was money to be made with tickets, and I didn't have kids, so I was, because during my time in Ring of Honor, I don't think anyone challenges me. Never made a nickel. All I did was lose money. It was an artistic triumph, but it was just a financial. It just wasn't able to work, and because and you know all this already, but we'll tell the listeners that have never heard me speak because of my passion. Because of my ego. Uh, I didn't let go. You know what it is? I knew we had a really good product. And I also knew I'm not going to be competing with Vince McMahon. I
Yep.
knew that. But, you know, we just couldn't get over the hump financially. We got caught in between the DVD era and the streaming era. If I would have had if I would have had a crystal ball, it's funny. We went to a meeting in like 2005 ish. Do you remember when Ring of Honor did those?
High pay-per-views.
Thank you.
They
Yeah.
were always, the stream sucked. Yes, and I ordered a couple of them. They were not great.
There was that era, but there was an era before that, like in 06, 07, where they were like in demand.
Oh yeah, when you guys did the actual pay-per-views, yes, yes,
Those were good. The only
those were
problem
excellent.
was
Driven, yep,
they were 6 weeks old.
yes, yep.
So the guy, he tried his best, and I'm still friends with him. This guy, Ken Gelman, it was his idea. It was a good idea, but he brought us to these guys in New York City. Whatever, these guys knew their shit, and the guys told us, "You're doing this backwards." He was basically, you know, Ken's bringing us for this guy's, you know, he would thought Ken thought this guy was going to put this whole thing over, but the guy says, "No, you're doing this backwards. First you need TV, then then you do pay-per-views." Well, we didn't have TV. Yes, eventually with HDNet, but that's another story.
Right.
But anyway, but here's the interesting thing. And once again, this is around mid 2005. One of the guys says, "I just want to tell you something." You know, and he goes, "Very soon, people, you know, I still, this is this is the era of the flip phone. There wasn't even a BlackBerry yet."
Yes.
He
Yep.
said, "Very soon, Cary, people are going to be watching sports, music, concerts, movies on their phone." And I'm like, I'm looking at him. Now, we didn't have the larger phone. And he's like, "I'm telling you, this is where it's going." And I remember leaving the office, and look, we're all looking at each other like, what the hell's this guy? Boy, was he right. And,
Yeah, he
you
nailed it.
know, if I would listen, if, right? You know, my father would say, if your grandmother had balls, she'd be your grandfather, right?
Yes.
But,
Yes.
you know, if you, so, yeah, so, that's, but yeah, that's how I got into the Ring of Honor business. But at least we did some really good stuff that still stands up and is still spoken about today. There was a golden era, and whether it was the Samoa Joe Punk era, whether it was the Nigel, you know, and Aries, and guys will argue, "Oh, it wasn't as good in 2008," and da 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 da. We tried our best. We tried our best, you know, in getting to work with Pro Wrestling Noah and bringing in these legends. It was thrilling, you know, and getting to work with Jim Cornette and having Bruno and Bobby Heenan and Mick Foley. People forget Mick Foley was part of Ring of Honor like 6 shows, and Ricky Steamboat.
Yes.
And yeah, so I'm proud of what we did. And despite it being a money pit, it is what it is. I'm still standing, and thanks to Tony Khan keeping the name alive. Hopefully, he'll release these old videos. Yes, our cameras weren't the greatest. We tried. I always tried. You were there. I always tried to. I made sure to always have lighting. Always have lighting.
Yep.
And try to give it a look. Some lights, ring light, some good ring lights, and some lights for the entranceway, and make it look like rock and roll. And as you know, I don't want to say primitive, but as rudimentary as it was, we had that. We were able to, that you just weren't going to some indie. You were going to a show. So we did the best. I did the best I could. Got a lot of help from people, and hopefully, I think that era for JP, for all the wrestling nerds out there, it'll always have a place. It's a period of time that'll exist. It won't be forgotten.
To me, that's the best because, like you said, getting people to go to shows with you was kind of getting a pain at that point. WWF was terrible at that point. I care what anybody said. They were so bad, like 02, 03. Well, really, 03 is when they really started to get bad for many, many years. It's just like unwatchable. There was like nothing for me and my buddies. So we gravitated to Ring of Honor. We fell in love really in 03. And I just checked my tickets. I was looking at how many stubs. Man, for 03 to 09, I went to so many shows. It's ridiculous. Way more than I even realized I went to. I had like 100 ticket stubs. I mean, it was crazy how many shows I went to. But Joe Punk, Bryan Danielson to me was the best, still is the best in the world. But he was the best. His title run was unbelievable. Then you had Nigel. I mean, to me, that was the absolute best. And like you said, throwing Steamboat, getting huge pops, Foley kind of teasing a match, and stuff like awesome stuff that period of time.
And we could go on and on, but God bless them, the Briscoes.
Oh, the best tag team, yes.
Yep. And Roderick Strong and Davey Richards and Eddie Edwards and the lists go on.
Homicide.
Claudio. I mean,
Carino, Homicide, yes.
Right. And Claudio, and just, I had some really good friends there. I was really close with Larry Sweeney. God rest his soul. He was great. He would have been the next, but I think we would both agree that he would have been a star.
Yeah.
And if eventually WWE would have seen something there. But yeah, man, it was a good era, and I'm glad that you were there, enjoying it.
Yes, man, just those were the days. And even though I had all the DVDs too, so like that, like those were the days. And it's just like, man, if ROH didn't exist, I don't even know if I would really have liked wrestling for that time period, because WWF was WWE was so bad. That was just like, oh God, like this is like, I need something, better wrestlers, better athletes, just something different that was actually pro wrestling. And that's what ROH was for that period of time for me, for sure.
Well, we certainly tried, and for the most part, we did a pretty damn good job.
Look at like even today, if you look at like the top guys, Joe obviously is still a top guy. Punk is still a top guy. Danielson just main evented. I mean, a lot of the ROH influence still alive today, 20 years later.
Look at the Bucks. I mean, my friends. Yeah, it just goes on and on. When I put on an AEW or even a WWE, see, it's funny. We didn't even mention Seth Rollins, Tyler Black.
Yes.
We didn't even mention Kevin Steen, Kevin Owens. We didn't even mention Generico, Sami Zayn. I mean, and it's really it was really a who's who, and many of them are still out there. So when I put on these shows, it's always like and you'll see me post a picture sometimes. I'll say all my children. That's,
Yeah.
that's how it feels. But hey, look, I'm glad that these guys are successful, and I appreciate you having me on today.
Hey, no problem. And even Kenny Omega, it was my first experience seeing Kenny was ROH. So even if you go look at that, and a lot of great talent came through ROH.
Absolutely.
All right, as we wind it down, we head towards the finish here. Cary, what's next? What do you anything wrestling related? What are you going to be up to next?
Who knows? I don't have any solid plans. If anyone wants to hear some wild, interesting stories, go on your go on all the various podcast platforms. Look up Last Stop Penn Station. You could follow me at ROH Cary CARY on Twitter and Instagram, and I'll see you in Trenton.
There you go, Cary. Thank you so much for all the time. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.